In this video, I'll be covering the blast etching of a Pelican case. The first step of any sandblasting project is to have a template that you'll use to protect those areas of the material you don't want to blast or etch. Here I'm actually using a 3/16 inch thick piece of aluminum that I had water jet cut. This particular plate is a spare leftover from a previous project that I had worked on. This particular tool is quite useful. This is a standard 14-inch chop saw. Normally you see these loaded with abrasive wheels in them for cutting steel. This particular one has been loaded with a 14-inch Tenryu wheel designed explicitly for cutting aluminum. Of note, when you're using these machines, a lot of people just put the material all the way at the back and clamp it up. These machines are effectively upside-down table saws if you think about it. So one part of the blade will actually push the material into the table while the back part of the blade is trying to pull it up and out of the clamping system for it. So rather than having it at the back, ideally you would want it towards the front or the middle when your piece is lined up. This particular piece is only 3/16 inch thick and the blade goes through it very, very easily. So this isn't strictly necessary in this case. But if you were doing this with larger parts, it would be a concern. Now that I've cut this template down to size from its original form, it's time to install it onto the box to be blasted. It's important to make sure everything's centered. You only get one shot at this. Once you've etched the part, you're pretty much done. You can't undo the etching. A note about Pelican cases. Pelican cases are made of polypropylene. Now, the material is not entirely flat between the ribs. So if you were to place a precision straight edge across the area between the ribs, you can see that it's not totally flat. Here I'm using a metal template. The metal is rigid and resists bending. And the metal is flat and the case is not, so there are gaps. So that will have to be something I'm careful with when it comes time to etch. Here I've just placed the entire case into a trash bag, and I'll tape the trash bag down, try to prevent any of the overspray from getting all over the place. Now the aforementioned gaps that are going to be in this template between it and the case will allow some blast media to move around inside the case. That'll have to be cleaned up later. I'm etching using a 70 grit aluminum oxide blast media. I actually get pretty close with the gun when etching. It's important to make sure that in this particular etch, the gun is perpendicular to the material. Also, if you get the gun too close, those gaps in between this metal template and the not entirely flat Pelican case will allow the blast media to move around underneath the template, which is bad. As long as you're perpendicular, then enough kinetic energy has been dispersed after it's hit the case that the abrasive media isn't actually going to cause you a problem. The polypropylene that Pelican cases are made out of is normally a translucent material. They've added some form of colorant to it to make it black, probably carbon black. This would also improve the UV resistance of the material, as normal natural polypropylene would break down under UV light. In this particular case, I'm using 100 psi blasting pressure. You don't need an enormous air compressor to run a sandblasting setup. However, if you do have a small compressor, it would be wise to let the compressor rest between recharges. If you blast and you drain the tank, the compressor will come on to recharge the tank. If you just keep blasting, the motor will run continuously. It may have problems keeping up. It may overheat. If you give the compressor some time in between your blasting, it will have a chance to recharge the tank and the motor can stop running and the heat can dissipate. So you can sandblast these sorts of things even with smaller compressors, but it will take quite some time as you're giving the compressor a chance to rest. Normally this sort of work is done in a blast cabinet. I don't have a blast cabinet, so it's being done outside. Note that the blast media goes absolutely everywhere, and this is quite a mess to clean up when you're done. Even if I did have a blast cabinet, it would be unlikely I would have room for a blast cabinet to fit the 1750 case that I'll be doing after this one, which is a long case from Pelican. So here I'm going to take the case out of the plastic bag, and you can see that there's some blast media that's stuck underneath the template that falls out. Once you're done, it's important to check all of the hinges and any moving parts on the case to make sure none of the blast media has worked its way into those parts, because you don't want it slowly eroding those pieces of the case over time. So here is what the cases look like when they're completed. You have this brown on black color from the etch. All Pelican cases have a texture on their surface, both inside and outside actually. And here is a close-up, a very close-up, of what this etch looks like at the case surface. You can see that we have abraded the texture down some, so the edges and the shadows are not quite as sharp in the brown section, which has been etched, as opposed to the black areas which have not been etched. And that is all. It is not terribly difficult. It does make a mess if you want to blast etch these cases, but the results came out looking pretty nice.